Hey, right now I want to do a quick example. Somebody asked me for help achieving a goal of theirs. Basically, they want to take the paladin and they wanted to add a series of animations where he's rotated in a number of directions. Um, Basically, like one animation for 20 degrees, one animation for 40 degrees, one animation for 60 degrees. And obviously, you don't want to humanly do this, right? You don't want to sit there and type that in. So that's where you got to use the matrix eater script view. Now, if you watch how I did that, I clicked Window, Views, Matrix Eater Script, because we're going to be a programmer today, but we're a user programmer. We don't want, a lot of times people don't want to download my whole code base to use it themselves. So what you can do is you can use this as a way to basically call up the code base, but do it from within the program, right? So the first thing we need to do is basically import the use of the animation class. And for that, just say animation equals com.hiveworkshop.warcraft3.mdl.animation. And this defines that you can refer to the animation class, right? Then what you want to do is you want to say model.add new animation, right? And you can make a new animation. And you should be able to give it a name such as stand 00, right? And then the next problem you have is you need to know what is the time value you're going to put your animation at. So for our paladin, what we can do, I can press F, and if I can actually get in here to this time-bound chooser thing, and if I click an animation like walk, it'll suggest the custom time, or you could even press OK, and you'll see it down here, that the maximum time of any animation here is 127433. So this tells us over here, if I start at 127433, I'd start immediately at the end of the last animation in the model. You don't want to start immediately there, you want to start after it. So let's start at 128000. And then we can run to 129000, right? And if you do this example, right, this should add an animation to the model. However, when you modify the model state directly, the program doesn't know about it. It'll work, but my program doesn't know about it. So you also want to reload the UI that you're seeing, right? And so in order to do that, I think what we want to do, I was just looking at this, you can do world.loadModel, and then we should basically be able to give it that. And I actually have not used my user space APIs very much. So I'm looking this up a little bit, but it should be, I think, world.loadModel. And the key when you do that, sorry, it's loading for a second there. Yeah, it wants to know, is it a temporary file? Should it make a new tab? And then you give it the model thing. And also, it's going to be, you're going to load the currently displayed model panel. So we're refreshing the UI. So we're going to say world load model. We can say true. What is true in JavaScript? I think it's just true, T-R-U-E. So true that it's temporary, right? Is it a temporary model? Do we want to select it when we pop it up, which we do, true. And then we give it the model panel. Okay, and what this should do when I click go on this guy, is it should launch it, like it adds an animation and then opens the model again, I think. I don't know if it worked. It kind of looks like it didn't work. Yeah, it kind of looks like it didn't work. I'm not sure. Let's see if there's like an error trace. I don't actually see one. It's pretty strange. So load model here is supposed to load that model. Interesting. So one thing we could do, if we go in here and we click around, let's see, I'll click run again. Let's see if anything happened. If I hit dissipate or like walk, if I load this, is it actually reloading? I don't think it's reloading because it's not. Oh, it is. Wait, it did reload. That's interesting. But despite reloading, it actually didn't refresh. It didn't show us the animation in the drop down over here. So that's kind of just dumb. That's pretty dumb. What you will find though is that if you save this guy to like an MDL paladin_test, and then you open that again, right? He's got stand 0, 0 3 times because we ran the program 3 times. So it is adding animations, but it didn't tell us. Also, these stand 0, 0s are all really dumb because they're all at the same time, 128 to 129, 128 to 129, 128 to 1. So you wouldn't want to do that multiple times, right? Don't just keep clicking this run button like I did. That's kind of a joke. So we should be able to keep our same code over here. I think it retains that code between models. So like if I just loaded again a new paladin, or like let's actually load Sir Gregory Edmondson, so you can tell, you know, it's a different file. Like, okay, we've loaded this different file, but we keep our same code that we were working on, right, in this little workspace. And so be that as it may, you can't currently see the animations previewed when you add them from the code. That's just an oversight. I haven't spent a lot of time in this little code panel. So it looks like world load model doesn't even work. So we're just going to do model.add. We're going to add the animation. And then you have the question, what animations do you want to add? The other thing is, as you can see, I am adding an animation that is pretty much directly a really boring, dumb animation where nothing happens, right? It's completely unanimated. What you want to do is you probably want to do this copy to interval function. So if you know the copy to interval function, and this, it copies to basically an interval of another animation, and then you can give it all of the various flag things, which I can show you in a second. Basically, what that should mean is that you can actually choose an old animation, like a previous animation that you want your new animations to all behave the same as. So maybe that's stand, right? I mean, I suppose you could use base, but base is a pretty dumb animation. So let's use stand, which is, you can see that the animations are indexed here by numbers. So this is animation 1. So what that's going to mean is I can say prev animation equals model.anims, and you want to put a 1 in there, model.anims 1. This means we'll get our base animation, or in this case, stand animation. Now, you could even call this stand animation. You know, they're just variable names. You could name it whatever you want. So this is our stand animation. So I say, okay, now I have a stand animation variable. And what I want to do is not only just make a new animation, but actually say new animation equals this code right here, which we're going to cut out of there and paste it. So now I make this new animation. And we are still going to add the new animation to the model. But along with doing that, there's more that we want to do, right? So this part, you can even leave yourself a note. Add the new animation to the model, and then copy the node animation data for the new animation, right? So this thing we didn't do yet is we want to take stand animation, copy to interval, and we're going to copy it to the interval of the new animation. So I think this should be new animation.start, new animation dot end. It might be interval end. Yeah, I think interval end. Sure, let's try interval end. Oh, no, yeah, you can probably just do end. Okay, new animation start, new animation end. And then comes the hard part. So this copy function, unless there's a better one. There might be a better one, but I don't think so. Copy, yeah, it doesn't. There's a copy visibility, but that's not the same. I think we do need to do this copy to interval. Basically, what this does is you give it a list of animation flags and a list of event objects. So for this, sorry, ignoring what's on the screen right now. The key thing that you want to get is this is going to have a series of steps. Okay, here are the steps. First, get access to all of the animation data of the bones. Get access to any existing event objects, just in case. And then pass these to the copy function. Okay? So for step 1, let's do step 1 right here. Right, step 1, what you need to do is bone animation data. Right, and the way they're going to do that, make a variable, your var here, and you can call this whatever you want, but let's call it bone animation data. Basically, you just do model.get all anim flags, and this is like a cheat code I put in there that basically says It's a really stupid name, but it says get everything in the entire model that ever animated. Like just get a reference to all of that stuff and all of it. And the problem is when I invented that, there's a design flaw that it wasn't able to process event objects. So then we're going to get event objects, right? And this is very similar, but similar to how we sort of imported animation at the top, we actually need to get event object just the same. So event object is going to be com.hiveworkshop.warcraft3.mdl.event object, right? So we got the event objects, and basically then what I'm going to say is I'm going to make a variable called event objects, plural, that are all the event objects of the model. Unfortunately, this isn't quite as easy as model.getEventObjects like a good API would give you. I just didn't code that in there. So instead what you have to do is you have to say sorted ID objects and give it eventObject.class as the type from which to get the ID objects. I think that should work. I didn't test this in advance before making this video, but I'm making this up as we go along, and I think this is all you need to do. Then you do step 3, which is pass these to the copy functions. So then what we need to do is we give it the bone animation data and then the event object. And there's this interesting problem that if you look at the copy to function, right, in animation, it has everything twice. And it has everything twice because you might want to copy between two models. The API allows you to do that. So if you're copying between two models, you would use I think it's source and then destination, I think is what this is saying. This is badly written, but this is really, really ancient code of mine. But I think the first one is the source and the second one is the destination, which is why the second one is the one that actually is sort of written to. So needless to say, just put the same thing twice in our example, right? And then you should be able to click run. Models is not defined. So here I put models.sorted ID object. That was a mistake. The problem is this code will run halfway. So our model is going to be broken. 128 to 129 is going to be like it already added that the first time it ran. So let's add 130, 131 just so we're clear on that. And try running it again. So that time it seems to have run successfully. So there's the big question, right? If I save this as Edmondson test, right? Edmondson test, and we save that, and we open Edmondson test, what you're going to see is it did the first time it ran, it added stand 0 and crashed. And that affected the model. So you absolutely need a backup if you're going to be using this kind of code, right? But after that ran, a second one ran, and apparently the second one didn't copy itself correctly. So that's kind of bad. It should have copied. I don't really know off the top of my head why it didn't copy, but let's take a look at the second one. You can see the second one's at a different interval. So I mean, it is from the second run of our code, but for some reason, copying the animation values to that time didn't actually work. So one of the reasons that might happen is when we get start and end, it could be that we gave it the wrong start and end. That's always a possibility. There's a couple of things that could go wrong. Although we gave it the new animation start and end, so I mean that should be valid. So sometimes you need to debug your code. You need to find out why didn't this do what I thought this was going to do. And if that happens, just make JOptionPane, which is basically a way to make a pop-up, and have that equal javax.swing.jOptionPane. And basically what that lets you do, not even as a variable, just as like a command statement, you can just say jOptionPane.showMessageDialog, and then give it the world, and then give it whatever you want to put in a pop-up. So in our case, we probably want to put like a string that says start and does new animation.start, because I wanted to know if that's valid notation to do new animation.start. And let's do the same with end, new animation.end. And then let's call this stand 02 and put it at 132 to 133. We'll keep making more animations while we're testing here, just to get our code right. So start is 132 and end is 133. So that seemed like that was correct, which is really kind of interesting. Because for some reason, it didn't seem like our bone animation data actually copied in there. I'm not sure immediately why. So if we ask ourselves, what would be the reason that this copy function would actually not copy? And it's an interesting thing. It's been a while since I used this little guy. Basically, this copy function, though, is supposed to take, a particular thing, and we have source start, source end, new start, new end. And basically just loop over everything in that range and replicate it and add in the copies. So it's very interesting to me that we didn't get a copy of that. I'm not immediately sure why that would be, because it should have copied stand animation into the start and the end there, but it didn't. So maybe the other thing we want to print out would be bone animation data length, like how much data is in there. Animation data length, just to help us debug, to try to see, why did this not work how we thought it would. And again, we can make a new animation just to keep, so we'll know the difference between our various runs of this code. Oh, that's interesting. Unexpected but found stand animation. Oh, well, okay. Okay, 136, 137, stand 4. Great. So 39. So there's 39 things in our bone animation data. So you would think that that would copy from one interval to the other. Now, as far as why it doesn't, it's really curious. It's really, really very curious. Because we're pretty much giving it everything it should need. And it should copy the animation. But it doesn't look like it does. One thing we could try to look at, I guess, is if we just go to a custom time, like 136.00 to 137, do we see our data at all? Because I would have thought we would see our data, but I don't see the data currently. Doesn't look like there's anything out there. Like stand 2, stand 4, they don't seem to have any data. So I'm still wondering, is there something, maybe you guys are seeing it and I'm not seeing it yet, something I didn't do with the copy function on the animation that actually made it fail to copy. It's definitely an interesting question. I haven't yet seen what I did wrong. Maybe you did. Maybe you know. I don't know yet. So I have the start and end and other start and end, and there's also an oddity that these actually use similar indexing, which is weird, but it should still work. It should be fine that it's doing that. Let's find something else that uses copy to interval and see how they use it, right? So for example, add animations from, right? From another model. And it adds, that's pretty silly. So what I'm actually left wondering is how this isn't used in the duplicate animation thing in the time-bound chooser panel. Because this duplicate guy, he gets one animation, and then, oh, it does use that. Wait a second. So are there two copy to interval functions? Oh, there are. What's the difference? Oh, you can do copy to interval of the same model. Okay, that must be it. I bet it needs to be the same. So all that stuff I said about we just put the bone animation data twice and pretend it's the same model even though it was written for two models, you don't need to do that. I was wrong. Just only put it once. That way it knows it's the same model and it'll handle it correctly. And then let's do 138 to 139. We'll call this stand 05. We might actually get good data on this one. Let's give it a shot. So that is going to say, if we get our custom time, and let's make sure we plug in those same time values, 138 to 139. Let's see if we actually see that animation data, 138 to 139. We pop that in here. Yes, see now our paladin is doing a stand animation. That is awesome. That's what we did wrong. Remember that. So the copy to interval function has two versions, one for between models and one for the same model. I messed it up. I tried to use the between model function for between to itself. It just gets confused if you do that. I'm sure there's some technical reason why it didn't work. Off the top of my head, I haven't thought of what it is, but there's a very good reason why I made two different functions. So with that in mind, now we know what we're doing, right? Now we have all of this as like a subroutine to basically add an animation. And you can actually, in JavaScript, you can even say function, add new animation that has name, interval start, interval end. And you can just create a new function in this thing, right? And it's going to let you do that. Really similar to JAS in some regards, right? Add new animation. And what this will let you do is to then say, okay, I've got interval start, interval end. Well, maybe what I want to do is we'll get rid of these pop-ups because those are pretty annoying. You could probably just delete those. And then we'll use that interval start and that interval end for our guy. So you can see I was going up to animation 13900. So we're going to start at 1400. But now we have this whole add new animation thing like in the bag just popped into a function, right? So let's try using that in a loop. So now we're going to say make many animations, right? And this is the key, the great thing about computers, right? Is I can say, okay, let's have animation count for how many, like it's the new animation count really, it's how many new ones I made, right? And we're going to be counting up. So then we'll say while new animation count is less than 36, new animation count equals new animation count plus 1. I think you can also do plus equals. Let's even do plus equals. New animation count plus equals 1 just means add 1 to the new animation count, right? So this is going to loop 36 times from 0 to 35, and that's going to stop when it equals 36. And for each time, we're going to add new animation, right? We're just going to call that as a function, and it's going to be named stand plus I, and let's even do I times 10 because that's how many degrees it's going to be, right? So you put that in parentheses, I times, I keep thinking of I, but it's not, new animation count, sorry. Just use new, there is no I. New animation count times 10. So whatever animation count, at the first time through, there's 0 new animations. So it's 0. Second time through, there's 1 new animation, so it's 10, and then it's 20, and then it's 30, and it's 40, and it just counts like that each time. And it does that while new animation count is less than 36. It's going to do that. It's going to keep counting. We're going to start at 140,000, and we're going to go to 150,000, right? And for each time, we're going to actually add new animation count. Think about this. The first one's going to be 140,000. The next one's going to be at 142, right? This shouldn't be 150. That was me being wrong. It should be 141. We're just doing animations of length 1,000. So the first one's 140,000. The next one is 142. And the next one could be 144. So in order for that to work, we need to actually add new animation count times 2. And we'll add that to both of these numbers. Or, excuse me though, not 2 actually, 2,000, right? You think, why is it 2,000 if the animation is length 1,000? Doesn't that seem like that doesn't make sense? It's because it's 1,000 length animation, and then we're leaving a 1,000 gap between each animation. So if I do that, and I click run, now in my model, if I actually go to this guy where I can view the animations, you can see I have stand 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, up to 350, right? So I have a stand that would be corresponding to each particular angle, and they're all animated stands because we put in there this copy code, right? So that's pretty good. This is a pretty good behavior, but it has a problem. We didn't actually rotate the model yet, right? So what we want to do is in our function, add new animation. We would probably want to actually name this add new rotation animation. And then let's make an additional variable, degrees, and we'll give it degrees, right? And so for the degrees, we already have this in new animation count times 10 as the name. Let's actually store that to a variable. So I'll say var degrees equals that. And that way I can say the name is stand plus the degrees. And the degrees variable, which is that fourth argument we added, is going to be passed in there. So now we have access to the number of degrees that we're rotating in each animation that we add. And the key becomes, as I'm adding these animations, can I also dictate to the computer that I want to actually rotate the model by that amount in that frame? That's a little bit more difficult because we probably don't exactly know. You can check in your model if you look at the way the model is broken down, right? For example, the Paladin, he has a root node, right? And this root node is the root of everything, pretty much. But if you select it, you'll notice it has multiple animation points, right? You can use the right arrow to just jump between frames where it actually has data. It's got 4 points of data in this animation. You don't want to have to bother to edit them all, right? So what you actually want to do is exit the animation editor. So you can click like A or one of these things, right? Animation editor is this little orange select nodes and animate up here, right? But we're gonna go back to select vertices. We're gonna go back out of the animation editor. And what we're gonna do is make a new bone by just clicking this bone button. And you probably just put it like right at his feet, you know, somewhere like that. And then once you place a bone, it stays in that mode. Make sure you click back on select and move. We're not moving things, but we just want to give ourselves the ability to select, right? So we have this new bone, and you'll see it appears over here in this view. But you want to really rename it and give it a good name, like bone rotation root, right? So this is the core of all of your rotation right here. And now that you have that, zoom back out to where you can see the root of the model, or some models have multiple roots, but whatever is that root of that model, and then just go to it, right click, and say set parent, and set the parent of what used to be the root of the model to now be rooted to bone rotation root. And this means that your model, if you rotate bone rotation root or whatever, right? If I go in the animation editor, for example, one of these dud animations with no data, right? Where he just sits there frozen, right? If we're looking at one of these and we click on rotate, and I actually rotate this root thing, it rotates the whole entire Paladin, right? Because he's inheriting from our new thing we created. So if we rotate the new thing we created, the whole entire Paladin rotates, right? So the key now is going to be having that root and using it. And one of the unfortunate things here, though, is we've kind of really mucked up this Paladin model because we added all these animations already. And if we press go again, now in the Paladin, instead of 35 animations, he's going to have 70 animations. It's just going to keep adding and adding and adding. So what you can probably do is do file close on this model. And that actually, it closes the model, but remember, you keep your code until the program exits, right? If you ever close, so you still, it would be good if you make, if you select all, copy on this, and make a notepad backup. That would be certainly a very wise thing to do, especially when your code is really coming along. You paste it in something like Notepad, and if you even want to, you can use a Notepad's highlighter, a JavaScript that looks about the same. So given that, right, now we can open Sir Gregory Edmondson again and do more work, but we don't have that root node that we created. One thing that you could do is you could make the action of adding that a part of your program, right? Because you might want to run this program on 30 different models. So if you're going to do that, you're going to open it and push play up here or something like that, right? You probably don't want to just manually add that node every time. So in order to do that, we can go ahead and import and sort of these like import statements at the top here that we were doing. Import the concept of the bone. The other thing we could do in my UI, I never made a button to create a helper, but actually in this case, it would be more logical for this to be a helper than a bone. So I'm going to go ahead and import the helper class, which is very similar to the bone class. You could do this with bone also. But we could say com hive workshop warcraft3 mdl.helper, and that gives us access to the helper class, right? What that means is that in our actions here, where we make some new animations, outside of the loop, right? Just one time, not 36 times, just one time, we probably want to add a node, right? So let's make a var variable that is the animation root node. And this is going to be a helper, and it's going to have the name, what should the name be? The name is going to be bone underscore rotation root. Yeah, let's actually instead of animation, let's be more specific on the name. the more specific your names are, the better you can read your code when you come back to it later, right? So we'll call it rotation root node. That's an even better name. And this rotation root node, the key is now we need to do that tricky thing we did in the GUI and say this is going to be the parent of what was previously the rotation root. The other thing is you have to decide what are you going to rotate around, right? So we can check in my code, but I'm pretty sure there's an API on helper. That is not the right helper. Sorry, it should be helper com.warcraft3 MDL helper. This guy. He has set pivot point, which will set the pivot point, but we also have to import the vertex class, which is in that just that same setup. So vertex, right? Vertex equals com.hiveworkshop.warcraft3.mdl.vertex. So now we have the vertex in here, and we have the helper in here. Because we have the vertex class, we can use that to pick a pivot point. So I can say set the pivot point that we're going to rotate around to be a new vertex who is just 0, 0, 0, just the center of space, right? Our rotations will be around the center of space. This is just like clicking at the feet of that paladin like we did. We're just setting it up that we can just spin around that center. So that's pretty good. That'll be our rotation root node. And now we know where it is, but we haven't gone and said make the parent of the other stuff equal to that. So as far as the API goes for doing that, if you look at basically these nodes, they have a set parent. I think they also have get parent. So that equates to just a function you can call. So pretty much what we're going to do here, make sure everything in the model that has no parent now is attached to rotation root node instead, right? So this is our setup that we're going to do, something like that. So this is a little bit of setup, and then we can have like end setup, something like that. So here's our little setup area, right? Make sure everything in the model that has a parent, and this is a little tricky, but I think it should work. Basically, you just want to say for every object in the model, and we might even, like, I wonder, can we do for var node in model dot, I call them ID objects, but they're just the objects that have an object ID. They're just the nodes of the MDL, right? For every node, if node.getParent, I think in JavaScript you can actually say if not node.getParent, and that's a way of saying if it's not defined, if it's a null parent, then node.setParent to rotation root node, right? The other key is you want to do model.add rotation root node. This informs the code that when you save the model, the list of helpers that are in that model will include this node that we've created, right? Speaking of that, I think you also got to put new on new helper up here. If you just called helper like a function, it's like you're trying to do Python code, and Python code is like that. This isn't Python, so don't do that. Yeah, so I think that should work. We make our rotation root node, we put that in there. And now we're well on our way to rotating, because the key is we can still reference, this is the tricky part, okay? We can still reference that rotation root node variable from inside the add new rotation animation function, right? What that means is we can make a step 4, assign the rotation for this animation, right? And what that means is I can say, okay, step 4, assign the rotation. And this is going to let us say, okay, rotation root node. Now, ideally, you would just say .rotate on the node, right? That would be great, but my API isn't that good. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to do a little bit more than that. We need to provide the code with what angle are we rotating, and we need to provide the code with when are we doing it, right? And these are two different things. They're both important. And they point out another problem, another really important problem, which is that our rotation root node doesn't have any rotation data yet. Now again, if the API was really nice, maybe you wouldn't need to think of it that way, right? You just say, boom, rotate. but the code isn't set up to be quite that nice. Unfortunately, I just didn't get it there yet. So you want to actually create in your setup, as well as the node, you want to actually create a rotation time track, right? If you've ever looked at an MDL model, if you look at like rotation, these are these time tracks. This is just an example of some model I had open, right? Where basically it says, okay, this is this particular node, whatever this thing is. What are we inside of here? We're inside of a bone called bone turret. So this bone, it rotates, and this is all of its rotation data. At these various times, it rotates by this amount, right? So what we need to do is we need to make one of these and say, okay, just rotate, and that should pretty much get it done. So the key for that is going to be, if we go back to Retera Model Studio here where our script is, we want to be able to say it rotated. And so we need to be able to access, now this thing, it should be called timeline. You think of that, it's a timeline of rotation data. When I built this code repo years ago, when I had this idea, I'm like, I want a code repo to edit Warcraft models, and I dreamed up this whole thing in high school. In high school, I didn't think to call it a timeline. I was much less experienced. So unfortunately, it's called anim flag. That's a really stupid name. But that's how it is. So we're going to import com.hiveworkshop.warcraft3.mdl.anim flag, right? Now, the API for anim flag is complete garbage, but it does work mostly. So the thing is, basically, you just give it a name starting out, and then that should probably get you well on your way. So what we need to do here is we need to make the rotation timeline. And the rotation timeline will be of class anim flag, because that's the name of this old class. And we're going to give it the string rotation. And basically that's setting, similar to this model here, it's just setting, what is the tag that thing's going to be named. So that's sort of straightforward. But where this kind of gets bad then is you got to choose your interpolation type, right? Are we like a non-interpolated, like instantaneous rotation, or are we going to do like a linear, smooth gradient between the rotations? I think all Reforged models are just linear because Blizzard probably didn't want to think about or understand how that used to work, and they just made everything linear. But in the old game, we try to have, you can have Hermite or Bezier curves to try to do a really smooth curve between a various frame to another frame. Reforged opts to just use many more frames, kind of like you see in this model I have open, which is great. We don't care about Reforged, really. We're not editing a Reforged model. But there's just an anecdote for the day. So our timeline, we have a function on it we can call to change the interpolation mode. I think the default is not to, so like it'll just jump to wherever you tell it to rotate, which is actually fine for our use case. So we can probably just leave that for now. Maybe another video, I could cover like, what's the API to change that. So the other thing, this is great, create empty 2018 function. This is in 2018, I got mad at the code base, so I made a new function. I'm asking myself, do we even have to care about this? I think we do have to care about this. I think maybe we should be using that function. That might be better. Yeah, that's better. That's way better. Okay. Yeah, I got a new idea. So the anim flag class is really broken. It's like really old. It really is from high school, okay? So we're going to call this create empty 2018 function, because I know you want to hate me for that, but it's like the new way. We're going to make this the new way, the better API. Okay, and for that, we're still going to give it the string rotation, but also we're just going to give it an interpolation type, and you can give it the global sequence information. Is it global sequence or not? Which is pretty straightforward. As far as the interpolation type, we need to import this from a different directory. This is, when you start rewriting your code over and over, it gets a little complicated. So we're going to say interpolation type, and we're going to basically import it. But there's this oddity that it's in a different sub package of Java MDLv2, right? So interpolation type here is great because it lets you just say interpolation type dot don't interp. Not interrupt, don't interp. Sorry, that was a typo. And you can actually go in here and double check like what these are. Yeah, actually it looks like it's don't underscore interp. So that means don't interpolate, right? And that's just a constant that you can set. And then you can also set its global sequence identifier, which this is not a global sequence, right? A global sequence means that you're not a part of the animations. Like stand and attack do the same thing. It's global, right? You don't want that in what we're building today. So you want to put a null in there for that global sequence information. Okay, great. All that aside, now we've created a timeline that is created the smart way. And the key is going to be we're going to take our rotation timeline and we want to add data to it. And actually, that's going to be a part of when we add an animation. So for each of these animations, like you have an animation at 0 degrees, you have an animation at 10 degrees, you have an animation at 20 degrees, right? And this code is repeating each time, and it's making each of those animations. Each time that it repeats, each time that it makes an animation, we want to add to this rotation timeline a new data point that says, for that animation, rotate here. For this animation, rotate here. So we're going to be doing that down here. This code isn't finished. Before we forget, the other thing you want to do is you want to add this flag to the rotation root node, which I kind of forget the API for that. So I always like to look up my own APIs just to be sure. Looks like it is .add. So that's great. Basically what that means is you can say rotation root node .add rotation timeline, right? And this makes sure that we're linking that information, right? If you were going to make 20 different nodes, this makes sense that I can't just make a rotation timeline and then assume something rotated, right? I haven't linked it with what is doing the rotating. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, let it be linked that the root center point that we created, right? That's the thing we're going to rotate around in each animation when we actually rotate. So we're really close now. Now the key is, what do you do on rotation timeline? And so there's a function add entry where we can actually just take interval start. But the problem is the value of what we rotate to. The value in Warcraft 3 models for rotations is not an angle, right? It's not a facing degrees. It would be fun if it was, because that's what we're all used to when we make maps, but it isn't. Instead, it is a quaternion rotator. Now, when I first encountered those, even in high school when I wrote this program, I kind of hated the quaternion rotators because they're not straightforward to think about, right? But what you can do to make them straightforward is to generate them from pitch, yaw, roll, right? Rotation around some axes. So we want to do that. We want it to be a yaw, a rotation around the vertical axis, right? We're just spinning around the vertical axis. So we're gonna do that. We're just gonna make it. We're gonna use a function from libraries, from stuff I set up. We're gonna make it as a yaw rotation, and we're gonna slap that in the model. So the way to do that, I created a class called quaternion rotation in high school to help with this. And this, you can just create these, but the best part is you should be able to create them. I think there's axis angle somewhere in here, isn't there? Get angle around axis. Yes, here we go. You can make a quaternion rotation from a vertex, which is a little bit of a hack because it's not really a vertex in space. I was just using it as a vector, but we store that as a vector and then a rotation angle around the vector. It looks like that angle is radians, right? It's an angle in radians. Remember that. That's relevant too. So this is pretty straightforward. Basically, we're just going to import quaternion rotation from that same set of libraries, com.hiveworkshop.warcraft3.mdl.quaternion rotation, right? And that's pretty straightforward. Now we have this rotator thing, but we need to add that rotator thing to our timeline at the particular time. And we can just say new quaternion rotation. We just make a new one for each animation, and we're going to give it the axis and the angle. And the axis is always the same. Just always do, we might even be able to do like vertex dot upward. I wonder, did I make a constant for that? No, I didn't. Okay, so just make a new vertex. Just say new vertex. Okay, and it's X, Y, Z. Z is upward in Warcraft 3, right? So 0, 0, 1. That part makes a lot of sense. It's X, Y, Z, and it's upward. It's a vector. It's dumb that it's called vertex. Think of it as a vector, as a direction, right? So we're rotating around the upward direction. And then we need the angle. How much do we rotate? And how much we rotate is just our degrees, except we need to do math, which I think is maybe in Java already. So let's try just math.2 radians of degrees. Now this might not work the first time, but the beauty of it is if it doesn't work the first time, just discard the model and make a new one, right? Also, before we start running it, let's make a backup in Notepad again. That was a really good idea. So maybe, I don't know if you want to save over your other backup or not, but I just did. Yeah, so here's my Gregory Edmondson, and this is a cleaned out one. He doesn't have any extra animations. And now let's click run. Node.getParent is not a function. Okay, so this has a problem that it looks like for node and ID objects probably didn't work. I'm not exactly sure why, but there's probably a reason for that. So be that as it may, we probably want to change that little logic right there. Instead of node and ID objects, let's say for, how do we want to go about this? How do you loop through them all? Our node and ID objects. I kind of was hoping I could get away with doing that. I guess I really can't because it said getParent is not a function. Unless maybe, do they just do node.parent? Sometimes they auto change my functions to just be easy access. No, then set parent's not a function. Yeah, okay, node is not loading correctly. So what you can do actually is you can make a loop that just uses an index, like I equals 0, I is less than model.id objects.length. I increments each step. It's like auto inserting those curly braces for me. It's pretty nice, but I wasn't used to that. We copy our code and we say, okay, let the node equal model.id object at index I. That's really what I meant to be doing. We do that. That ought to work. Let's try it again. Okay, can't read property 0 from undefined at line number 20. So, oh yeah, this is supposed to be plural, ID objects. Okay, add new animation is not defined at line 62 because we changed the name to add new rotation animation. That makes sense too. Now, we want to reload the model because we did just have a failed run, right? When you have a failed run, you want to reload your model so that you're sure it'll be good. Okay, math.toRadians is not a function. So for that, this is going to make you sad probably, but just use java.util.math. It's different than the normal math, and it'll have that function. Okay, great. Now we'll get Magroth the Defender over here instead. All right, and we'll click run. Now as you can see, run claims to have run successfully. So we apparently only created stand 0 though, so that doesn't really work. That must be because this guy's stand is a different animation. Something else is going on because we didn't make multiple animations, which would have been our intention, right? You'd have thought that we'd have multiple animations created. It almost makes me wonder if we got another like crash in there or something. But I don't actually see one. Not sure. toRadians. Oh, it's java.lang.math, not java.util.math. Sorry. Yeah, okay, let's go reload our model again. That was my bad. Okay, we got KL. Let's go back to Edmondson actually, because it's a better fit for our code. Okay, now we ran it again. I don't actually know if anything went wrong or not. Did he just stop animating? It's just strange. Yeah, I wanted to see. Great, so now we have our animations. Here's stand 0, okay, and then stand 10, and you can see he rotated, and then stand 20, and you can see he rotated again, and then stand 30, you can see he rotated again, and then stand 40, you can see he rotated again, and then stand 50, and it just goes on like that in each of those animations, right? And he's got a consistent animation within that one, because we chose don't interpolate, so it's not like it would do like smoothing from one animation to the next or something. He just, you know, animation is one, animation is the next, and it just jumps right to the different rotation values. So that's pretty good. It's still a bummer that we're going to save this as Edmondson test 2. So it's currently the case if you use this programmatic access to actually modify stuff that it doesn't update these drop downs, which are cached. So we have to actually like save the model and open it again to repopulate the drop down. But you can see once I do that, we can see, you know, stand 150, 160, 170, 180, and you have that all the way around with just every angle of the rotation right there. So this is pretty much all you need to know to do that, I think. For the case that the guy I was talking to was making, you might run into the problem that, you know, maybe you don't actually want all these other animations. If that's where you're at, you should be able to just go in here and like push delete, I think. This is a little maybe inconvenient that you have to click it each time. It would be great if I made it you could select them all at once. But you can go in here and just push delete, delete, delete. Like if, you know, if it's like a showcase model that spins in the UI. Because, you know, for almost anything other than the Warcraft 3 UI natives, you're probably not going to need to do this, right? Fundamentally, like most of the time, you can just set the rotation in game, right? But this is like if you're in, you know, you've got the UI natives and they're preventing you from rotating or something, and so you need to specify it as an animation. Also, I would advise if you do like I just did, and you delete all the other animations, you can see now stand 0 is index 0, stand 10 is index 1, stand 2 is 20, stand 30 is 3, stand 40 is 4, stand 50 is 5, right? So you even have like the index can just be the angle divided by 10, which is even more beautiful of math. So yeah, there you go. That is how you generate, using Retera Model Studio, a sequence of animations whereby each animation corresponds to a particular rotation, and do it in a way that you don't have to sit there making them all. So yeah, there you go. I'm going to save this script, so I'm sure the next thing that's going to happen when I send this guy this video is he's going to say, well, can you just give me the code? I don't want to type that. Yeah, maybe. I'll try to make it back with that. Yeah, all right, great. You guys have a good one.